right, let's try that again. All right, good evening, everyone. All right, I love it. I know we are between you and 5 o'clock, so we're going to make this session really interesting, hopefully for you. Hope you get a lot out of the session. What we're trying to do here is to give you two things. We want to give you some tools. We want to give you some features that have come recently that can help you deploy Tableau desktops and prep better, easily in your organization. And the second thing is, some of the things that you see here is based on the feedback that we've received in the last couple of years. So what we're looking for also is areas of improvement, things that are challenging for you. Please feel free to talk about your use cases as we talk through these slides so that we can get a sense for where your problem areas are so that we can continue to innovate in these areas. Is that cool? Yes. All right, excellent. All right. My name is Aruna Balasubramanian. I'm a product manager at Tableau. I work on the licensing area. This is Steve, my co-presenter. Steve is a software engineer. He's been with Tableau for 3.5 years, or 2.5 years. One thing I really like about Steve is that he takes time to actually go and visit customers such as yourself and get actual real deployment scenarios so that he can then automate those and make sure that we're testing it the way you deploy it. On a personal front, Steve is into biking. He just started biking this year. Can you believe the number of miles that he's done this year? It's crazy. He also is an avid yoga practitioner, having practiced for 10 plus years. And he's someone you call Zero to Lima, which is Army speak for a saxophone player. I learned that just this year. And so I'm going to cover the second half of it. I'm going to talk more about product activations. I'll give you a little bit I'll give you a demo of a feature that's coming up. And then Steve is going to start off, and he's going to talk about the planning and the deployment phases. So I'll hand it over to him.
All right. Thank you, Aruna. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Aruna. As she mentioned, she's one of our product managers for the licensing team at Tableau. She's been there 6.5 years, so that's a real veteran in Tableau years. One thing I've really appreciated what she's been able to do is go out and also kind of reach out, get customer feedback. Because as I talk to customers about deployment, it turns out issues around licensing activation tends to be one of the more challenging aspects they have for managing that. And maybe some of you know that, and perhaps that's why you're here, to learn more. But she's done a great job of getting this information, bringing it back to her team, and coming up with some great solutions to make things easier and simpler for all of you. So I'm really glad she's been adding that value to Tableau and making things better for our customers. On the personal front, as you can see, she loves to travel. She's been to 12 countries in the world, and she hopes to grow that number much more. She loves hiking in the national parks of the United States. So she's visited 8 of the great national parks in the US, and that is a number she also hopes to bump up. And when she's at home, she loves to spend some time gardening, and here you can see a picture of some of the beautiful roses that she's grown. So why attend this session? We've talked about a couple reasons to do this, but one is Tableau continues to invest in the enterprise. And no, that's not the enterprise I mean, but we do want to be supporting deployments of kind of all shapes and sizes because we know companies have vastly different requirements depending on what they're doing, how many users they have. And you could be a big company with only a small number of Tableau users or a small company with many Tableau users. So we do want to be able to pipe this information sort of directly into your head so you'll have some good takeaways from this. So knowledge sharing about deployments is really what today is all about. We want to share some of the latest developments of things we've been working on. And at the end, if there's time, we'd like to get some feedback from you about things we can do better. So we can have that knowledge transfer coming the other way as well. And don't worry, if you're not a Star Trek geek, we're not going to be having lots of Star Trek stuff throughout the talk. We just got a few little things. And another reason to be attending is you're going to learn what's new in our products. So this is going to be things like how our desktop installer continues to evolve, about how we're doing virtualization support for desktop applications. And you'll learn about some of the new installers that have come out this year. And finally, you'll learn about some of the new activation methods that we're coming up with. So what do we mean by desktop applications? So in this talk, when we say desktop applications, we're meaning things that are going to be running on Windows, running on Mac. This could be on a laptop. This could be on a desktop computer. What we won't be covering are things that are running on Linux, anything that we have that runs on the mobile OSs, And we won't be covering anything about Tableau Server, how to deploy that. There are some other talks about that, and we've got some references at the end that we'll point you to. So the first step, if you're going to be doing deploying, is being thoughtful and spending a little bit of time up front doing some planning for what you need to do. We recommend the approach of measuring twice and cutting once. Just to save yourself some time and hassle, you may think, well, I've deployed some software packages before. I know what I'm doing, and that might be the case, but it's good to kind of step back, understand what might be different about Tableau or not, and how to best deploy it before you dive in. So some of the planning considerations are, where are you going to be installing to? Is this going to be on a physical machine? Is this going to be some kind of virtual machine that you'll be using? What are the system requirements? These are going to be things like what operating system version you need to be using, how much memory is required, how much storage you'll need to have available for the application. There's also versioning issues with Tableau itself. If you do have Tableau Server and Tableau Desktop, depending on what versions are there, certain feature sets may or may not be available. So if you have team members that are sharing versions of Tableau workbooks that were created in an older version, somebody else opens and edits in a newer one, the person who's using the older version may not be able to open that workbook anymore or may not have access to all of the features. So that's something to keep in mind. Network access is also important. That is required for doing your activations for licensing and getting access to the maps. Some other considerations are activation method. Aruna will be going over that in quite some detail later. Database driver needs is an important one. So while we do have bundled database drivers within our installers, they may not have all the ones that you need for your users to be able to get to the data they need. So if that isn't one of them, what you see here is the link to our database download driver page. These are all the drivers that have been vetted by Tableau, are supported by Tableau to connect. So if there are certain ones you need for your users, this is a place to go to make sure you get the one that Tableau is going to work with best. Oh, and one thing I will point out is any place where you see things underlined, these are live links, so when you do get a copy of that, you're going to have access to all the things that I'm pointing out here. So the desktop installation options are another one. So by default, we try to choose what we think are going to be the most appropriate options across the board, but of course we can't do it right for everybody all of the time. So it's worthwhile taking a look, going in there and seeing what options are available, making sure they're tuned and set appropriately for what your organization needs. Also, take a look at what's new. Every time release comes out, there are release notes available. This is a great place to take a look at not only what Tableau features are new, but often we have like new developments for installation, perhaps things for activation. So I know we've made some installer changes that can simplify things, that where previously people had to do some extra steps to get work done. We've now made the installer capable of taking care of that for you, so that can save you some work. So stay on top of that because we may do some things that save you effort in the future. Also be thinking about upgrading, because once you do an initial deployment for someone, if it's like something small, you have a couple of new users, you need to get Tableau Desktop on their box. That's one thing, but when it's like time to upgrade, we have a new version and your company wants to migrate to that, and you may have many, many more times to do that, you need to have a good strategy for how you want to do your updates. So I'm not going to get into updating strategies, but I just want to point out it's something to be mindful of. And along those lines, depending on sort of how sophisticated your IT shop is at your company, that you need to integrate deploying of Tableau with your existing deployment processes. So if you don't really have much of a process right now, I'd say that's a good thing to think about because I'm sure you have other software you need to deploy in addition to Tableau. And be thinking about how you want to test Tableau in your environment. Because it's one thing to have somebody sit down at their desk, maybe they're an IT admin, they can kind of bang out a script or get something and it's looking good and it runs great there. But if you go and try to run it on a user's machine and they don't run with the same permissions or don't have the same credentials, you can run into a couple of snags. So be sure that you're testing appropriately in a representative environment of what your end users are going to be using. So the next step, once you've done your planning, is kind of getting down to the work of deploying. And there are a few different ways of deploying. So the first one I'd like to talk about is self-service installs. So with a self-service install, what I'm talking about here is that you're basically giving the end user the keys and letting them drive the process, letting them do the installation themselves. So in some cases, IT really isn't involved at all, that somebody will get the go-ahead to get a license of Tableau, maybe their admin handles that for them, they download Tableau themselves, they install it, somebody gives them the key, they activate, and they're off and running. More often than not, if it's a larger company, that's not the case. that IT wants to have some control on that. So in cases where IT may still support a self-service install is, one, just making sure everybody's using the right version of Tableau that you want to be using within your org. So in that case, one common approach is you'll download the right installer that you want people to be using. You'll put that on a share internally, and then you can kind of point people to that when it's time for them to do their thing. In that case, too, it's good to provide some instructions there. I mean, you may want them to do the activation and registration themselves or not. That's kind of your call. But for self-service, you try to keep it lightweight, and usually IT involvement is minimal there. So if somebody is installing Tableau for themselves, what are they going to see? What do they get? So what we're looking at here, this is a shot of the UI from our Windows installer. So if somebody wanted to install for themselves, it's really quite easy. All they need to do is click the EULA or the license agreement box there, click install, wait a few minutes, and Tableau will be on their box. When Tableau Desktop starts up, or prep, they will see that it's ready to go. They will need to do the activation and the registration, but it's really quite simple. Not much is involved with that. So a couple of things about our Windows Desktop installer, that we do have some common database drivers packaged in that you see here. We do have some basic customizations options available. You just kind of click the button. You can get in there. That can be some things like whether or not you want the database drivers installed. Do you want to have some shortcuts created? And we do have some great online documentation about installing Desktop for yourself. So here's a look at our installer on Mac. It was back in the 10.2 release that we moved over to an Apple installer package. Before that, we had the old kind of drag and drop package style of install, but we changed for a few reasons. And some of those are being able to give some new features. So one is being able to bundle common database drivers along with this. We are now able to offer some basic customization within the app. It is now more secure because previously we were unable to assign just the drag and drop style package, but now we can securely sign this so you know it's coming from Tableau. And logging is available. Should anything go wrong and you need to contact support, you have logging, which wasn't something you would get otherwise. And like for Windows, we do have the Install for Yourself guide for Macintosh. So one of the new installers this year is Tableau Prep. Maybe you've heard about this already. If you haven't, it's one of our new products for sort of cleaning and preparing your data before you're able to do analysis within Tableau Desktop. So in 2018.1, back in April, that was the first release of this, and we do have it available for both Windows and Mac. And with the other installers, there's also an install guide for yourself. Now, one of the things I do want to point out with the Tableau Prep UI here is that it's virtually the same as what you saw for the Windows installer. And we wanted to have that common design throughout, so no matter who's doing this style of installing for themselves, it's going to be a similar experience. So if you've known how to do it once, if you get another Tableau product, you're going to know what to do again. There's no learning curve once you've done it one time. And the last new installer I want to talk about that we've come out with this year is Tableau Bridge. Now previously, Tableau Bridge was called the Online Sync Client, and it was something that was bundled in with the Tableau Desktop installer. So if you don't know what Tableau Bridge is, it's a Tableau online feature that's used to securely access databases that you may have behind your firewall. Because with Tableau Online, that's something that Tableau runs. It's our Tableau Software as a Service offering. So we maintain and manage everything ourselves, but of course, it's likely you're going to have some database connections you're going to want to make to Tableau Online and do that in a secure fashion. And Tableau Bridge is the tool you'll use for doing that. But it's no longer part of Desktop. It's a standalone installer, and you see the UI for it right here. So it does require the ability to sign into Tableau Online once you have it installed. You run something called the Tab Client. But once you do that and sign in online, it doesn't need a product key anymore, which is great because before, when it was bundled with Desktop, you had to install the full Desktop product, which meant you had to burn a key when you did the installation. So there were instances where people didn't want to use both Desktop and Bridge at the same time. We've split it out, so now Bridge can be installed separately on its own. And of course, we've got a Bridge installation guide for you to help you out if you are using Bridge. So before I move on and talk about automated deployments, which is sort of the flip side of doing the self-service installs, I was just wondering with a show of hands, I mean, at your companies where you work, how many are doing sort of a self-service install model? Anybody? Okay, that's a fair number, a few more than I thought. So I'm assuming everybody's doing automated or you're looking for ideas for how you may want to do your installations. So thanks for that feedback. So before diving into some of the automation methods, I want to point out our online deployment guide for others. So while we do have instructions for how people can install Tableau for themselves, if you're an IT administrator and you need to be installing for your organization, this is a really great resource. As you can see here in that sidebar, there are things about planning, internet access requirements, licensing, troubleshooting, way more than we're going to have time to get into detail here. We're kind of touch on most of these and kind of give you a flavor for them. But if you really want the nitty-gritty details, or if you're having some trouble when you're doing your planning or your installation yourself, that's a great place to go to. So how are installations automated? Well, one of the most common ways is just kind of a batch file or script. And that could be something that you or your team codes up and then you make available for someone who's able then to run it on their machine and get the installation of Tableau Desktop or Prep for them. Now with this, it's not just doing the install of Tableau, there may be some other things you want to do. There can be such things as maybe you want to uninstall the older version that's there before you lay down a new one. Maybe you want to do some activation, do some registration, do some installation of the database drivers you need. So all those things can be encapsulated within a batch file or script. Software configuration management system is another common approach, frequently used. I mean, if it's a larger shop that you're working for, that can do some of the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to do so much of the scripting itself. There's usually wizards for kind of packaging up the application installs for you. Here we have a screenshot of SCCM or Microsoft's Software Center Configuration Manager. And a third way that I've seen some of our Tableau customers use that's not uncommon is have a user-facing tool. This could be something like a web portal that a user within the company would go to see what software is available for them. They'll see Tableau Desktop or Prep. They'll click on that, and then behind the scenes, you're probably interacting with some sort of software configuration tool that's doing the installation and putting the software down on the machine for them. So if you are doing an automation of the Windows installer for Tableau Desktop or Prep, the main thing is really understanding our command line support. So here you can see if you're just running the Tableau installer exe and you're using the /? at the end, it will bring up this dialog here. And what this has is some of the basic setup help. So some of it's just kind of standard Windows installer MSI type stuff. But at the bottom, we've got a few of the installer properties that are available. So we have a number of properties available to make the install process easier for you. There's more than we're able to cover within this little dialogue. So we do have a link here that will take you to the appropriate section in the deployment guide. So you can take a look at all of the installer properties there and pick and choose the ones that fit your deployment scenario. So we do have some new Windows installer properties that we've added in the last year. So first one I'd like to call out is the Activate key. This is really great because in the past, everybody who was deploying Tableau, you would do your installation of Tableau, and then you need to have another step of doing the activation of it. So by using this property here, you're now able at install time, if you provide a key, that the installer, once the product has been installed, will go ahead and do the activation for you. Similarly, registering a user was something that also needed to be done as a post-install step, but now this is something that the installer can also handle for you. One thing, though, to make this possible is you do need to prep the registry. There's information in our documentation about how to do this, but there's a key under HKCU where you can put the information that's needed for registration. If you put one here and the installer finds that information available, we'll go ahead and do the registration for you. Another new feature that we've added this year is the Remove Installed app. So this is a case where you only want to support having one version of Tableau installed on a user's machine at a time, and you want to make sure the old one gets cleaned up. By adding this property here, that will do that for you. So this only works for our Windows exe-based installers. So if for some reason you're like using a really old version of Tableau, let's say like back a Tableau 8, that won't work here, but back to Tableau 9.2, this will work. So it's an easy way of cleaning up the older version for you and something that you don't have to automate yourself. And lastly, I'll point out the Reclaim license. This is great for people who are having trouble keeping track of all their license. And one thing that's easy to do is you uninstall Tableau, but you forgot to reclaim the license. Or maybe a machine goes back to IT and it gets wiped before Tableau was uninstalled and a license got orphaned behind. And that still counts against your key activation count, and that's kind of a problem. So one thing we wanted to do to make that a little bit easier is that if you're using a perpetual license or a term-based license, if you uninstall and are using this property and set it to 1, it will automatically reclaim that license for you, so you're able to use it again on another machine. So before moving on, I do want to point out that all of these new properties here, this all came from feedback from you guys. I mean, as we're interacting with customers, talking to the field, hearing what's working well, what challenges you're running into, we really listen, because I mean, you guys have invested in Tableau and we want you to be successful with that. So if we're doing things that aren't working so great for you, if you've got some scenarios that we haven't really thought through that well or haven't addressed because you might be doing something new, we really love to hear from you and appreciate your feedback. So please feel free to reach out and let us know. So I only touched on a few of the new properties here, but the full list is online in the deployment guide. And we do have a tip from the captain's log. So this is an important one to remember. So if you are doing any activation or registration at install time, this does need to be run in the end user's context. And that's because the licensing needs to reach and touch some information under HKCU. So if you're running under an admin account or a system account, that's not going to be available for it. So that's something you would have to work around if you're using these situations. But if you're able to run things within the user context and provide admin credentials, then you're going to be golden here. And with a single command line, you can install, you can activate, you can register, and you can even uninstall a previous version. So with scripted installs, they can be integrated with your existing scripting tools. So I mentioned SECM before. Oops, wrong slide, not there yet. Well, if you're doing it on Windows, the first thing you need to do is just put in the command line. I mean, basically, that's what you would need to have in your script or whatever tool you're using here. So all you need to do is something like in this example, where you give the name of the Tableau installer exe. In this case, I'm using the /quiet switch, which means no UI is going to pop up on the screen when install happens. I'm accepting the EULA. I've turned off the auto update feature, and I'm writing out the log information to something called logfile.txt. On Mac, it's similar, where you run the installer command, you provide a pointer to the Tableau desktop package. In this case, there's something I haven't talked about yet, which is called Apply Choice Changes XML. With this, you can provide a plist, and this mirrors the customization options that are available within the Mac GUI. So these are things like what database drivers you want to install, do you want a shortcut, things of that nature. Now with Mac, things aren't as rich in the installer experience as they are on what Windows has available. So if you do want to do things like activation and registration, those still need to happen as a post-install process that's done. We unfortunately aren't able to support that directly within the installer on Mac. So with deployment tool integration, so here's an example I want to show with System Center Configuration Manager. So others are similar to this, but if you take a look at what we have in the installation program line there, that's basically the same line that I had on the previous slide. That once you've figured out kind of what installation options and properties you want to set, you can kind of just drop that into whatever wizard or settings are needed for your configuration management tool. Likewise, if you're doing the uninstall, it's kind of the same thing. You put that information in there. Now, one thing that's nice about a tool like SECM is that it can manage a lot of other things for you. It can help with how the content store is done, where you put the installer, making it shared smartly across the network, kind of limits how things are done. Also, in terms of who gets access to the software, it's very useful too. So if there are only certain groups of people that you want to have access to Tableau and be able to download it, it can help do some things like that for you. And we have another tip from the captain's log. Is if for some reason that you're working with a tool that's unable to work with an exe installer and needs to use an MSI, that our installers are Wix-based. And within the Wix tool set, there's a utility called Dark that gives you the ability to crack open an exe installer and get to the MSIs inside. So in our case, we've got the main MSI for Tableau, Desktop, or Prep. We also have the database driver installers in there, which you may or may not want to use. But the other important MSI to pick up is the Windows C Runtime installer, just because Tableau has dependencies on that, so you'll need to have that installed alongside Tableau if you do an MSI-based install. So, this is wrapping up my portion here. I want to go over some of the key deployment takeaways that I hope you all come away with. So one, just remember to think through the range of options when you're going to do your planning before you dive in and start doing some of the deployment. So that's going to be things about, do you want to be deploying on a physical machine, or are you going to be using a virtual machine? What sort of activation strategy do you want to use? Do you want to do a self-service install, or do you want to kind of fully automate your installation experience for your users? I've said it enough, but I'll say it one more time, because I can't recommend the deployment guide for desktop and prep highly enough. There is a lot of really great information in there, and if you haven't done a Tableau deployment before, it's a really great resource to go into and take a look. And I recommend going back from time to time, because we are updating these as we add new features. So you may learn a new trick that can help you out that you aren't taking advantage of. And lastly, check the release notes. Stay on top of those new installer developments, because as we get feedback from you, we do roll that feedback in, make new features, and try to make things as simple as possible for you to get Tableau onto your users' machines and get them being active using some great data analysis tools and making fabulous dashboards. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Aruna, who's going to talk about product activation for desktop and prep.
All right. We're coming to the portion where all of you are going to be super awake and really passionate. So let's talk about activations. What I'm going to plan to cover here is 3 different activation methods. The first one is what you know today, which is the permanent activation method. This is where you activate once a year and the activation gets tied to a physical machine, which has its own challenges. We'll talk about that. The second one is an activation method we introduced early this year. We call it authorization to run. More details coming. And finally, we're working on a feature we're calling identity-based activation, which I'm actually going to give you something about, also demo it for you. So just to level set, what you experience today is a permanent activation. This is where your user enters a key into the desktop, or you have an automation that activates the key on behalf of the desktop. That information is sent to our server, which is the licensing.tableau.com. And in turn, what the machine gets back is a permanent activation record that gets stored on the machine. Now this comes with a number of challenges, right? So if the user now wants to use a second machine and they've already had an activation of previous machine, now you have to deactivate before you put it on something else. Now Steve talked about how we have this reclaim license, but again, it's an additional step and it's not something that IT really likes, right? The other things that happen is if the machine gets lost, if the laptop is lost, or if the software is uninstalled, you've lost an activation, and it's hard to reclaim something that's the machine has completely gone away. And obviously, this is not a great activation method for virtual machines, right? And so, we understand that, and so we decided to go with a second activation method that came out this year. We call it authorization to run. This activation method is where your desktop, again, the user experience is exactly the same. They use product keys, or you have an activation script that activates the key. The information is now sent to a service that Tableau hosts in AWS. We call it the authorization to run service, or ATR service. The service actually activates the desktop key on behalf of the desktop with our licensing server and stores the activation record on the service itself. What in turn goes to the desktop is a short-term lease, or we call it an ATR, or authorization to run. The duration that you can set the configuration duration, and I'll talk about that in a second, but you can set it on your side and you can override that on the service side so that you can control how long the duration the activation is for. And this has some benefits. So before I go into the benefits, the difference with the previous permanent activation method is that now your desktop, because it talks to the service and it's getting short-term leases, it needs to connect occasionally and then renew its lease, right? So as long as your user is using the desktop, it just renews that ATR in the background. The user doesn't know any different. When the ATR has expired, let's say the machine goes away, it's a virtual machine, the machine goes away, the ATR does expire, and the service knows now to reuse the activation the next time the user logs in from a different machine. The duration itself can be set, and you can set it as short as 12 hours. And so for virtual machines, this is great because the user can log in a couple of times a day and they won't max activate. If you're using on laptops and stuff like that, then you can set it to longer. And the last thing to remember is really the benefit of this feature is that you don't have to think about deactivations. So that is automatically taken care for you. So we introduced this feature, this activation method in a feature we call virtual desktop support. That feature went out in 10.5. It uses registry and plist files on Mac, but really you don't have to worry about any of that. We enabled it so that you can use command line options. You can set it, you can enable the feature in the installer, as well as you can set the duration in the installer itself. So because of this, it is actually good for virtual machines. There's a caveat there that I'll point out. The main thing is you don't hit max activations. The deactivation is taken care of by itself. What it's not good for is that if you have offline activations that you do today, this method is not for you. And finally, if you're using things like AppV, application virtualization, we don't support that yet with this activation method. However, that's changing with the next one I'm going to talk about. And also, Captain's Logs tells us that this is the key thing that you need to remember. While the ATR method definitely helps you with automatic deactivation, your user will still need to enter the license key every time the ATR is expired, and then they're now using on a completely different machine. But we have several customers who've actually had success in scripting this, so that as your user logs into the machine, they can just activate it in the background, and then the deactivation is taken care of by us. So let's talk about identity-based activations, which is a completely new method. So in this activation method, the server is the focal point. This is where you're going to manage your desktop users, your prep users, your server users, all in one central place. The desktop user logs into Tableau server using their server credentials. That information, that server sends off an ATR request to an ATR service and gets back a short-term lease. Again, this lease can be configured on the desktop side. You can override that. And then it's forwarded from the server back to the desktop. And as you can see, the key benefits of this feature, before I talk about key benefits, give you a demo. Now this is in code, it's in active development, so the user interface may not be what you expect. And I have to log in. But here's kind of how it works. Let me get rid of that. Okay, you guys can see this, right? So this is a Tableau server that I'm using. I'm logged in as an administrator. You'll see that I am a creator on the server. So for this to work, you do need a creator subscription license. And this is where you will control your users and you can set their roles and things like that. And now I'm just going to enable the feature because it's active development. It's not on by default yet. And what you'll notice now is for the first time, there's an activate with credentials option, which was not available today, right? So you can activate your trials, you can activate the product key, or you can activate with your credentials. So I'm going to type that. I am going to say connect to server. And what you'll see now is that it's the same desktop experience you get when you are publishing to your workbooks and things like that. And so it'll ask me for my server credentials. So I'm going to put that in very quickly. And in just a second, it should activate. And now if I open Tableau desktop, which should open by itself, and it crashed. So you can see that it's actually in development. If I go to manage product keys, it'll tell me that I'm actually a creator on the machine. You'll see that I don't have any license keys there that you would see today. What you see is that I'm a creator on the server, and that's how I've gotten activated, right? So that's pretty much the feature itself in a nutshell. Make sure, okay.
Aruna, do you want to take a question now or
Oh
wait?
yeah, sure, please.
So it dynamically takes your credentials from server and makes sure that you have the same access in Tableau desktop if you're getting desktop for the first time? Is that what the essence is?
Yeah, so the essence is this, that when you have a creator license today, you actually have access to Tableau Server, Desktop, and Prep. And we're using Tableau Server Creator license as a way to activate your Desktop and Prep. And so essentially, you don't have to worry about license keys anymore. That's the key, right? So you're not managing keys anymore, you're just managing users. Yep. So that essentially is the three benefits of this is that you're doing centralized license management. You're actually managing users. You're not managing keys anymore. We also actually are going to give you visibility on who is using your desktop and prep and server users all on Tableau Server. So I'll talk a little bit about reporting. And the last one is you're not using license keys. And this is where the pain point has been, right? Managing keys and not having a strong tie-in between license keys and users is a huge pain today. And that's kind of what we're trying to address here. This feature is going to be in limited beta as of 2019.1. And so if that's something that's of interest to you, we'd love for you to try it out, give us feedback. We don't have reporting built in yet, but that's coming soon. The last one is it does require you to have subscription licensing. Because it uses a creator role, that's one of the limitations of this feature. But we're looking at other things that we can do for customers who are on other types of licenses. Go ahead, you have a question?
That's what I was going to ask,
Yep.
because we're on purchasing individual licenses with core-based. So I guess were you planning on being able to install the desktop licenses onto the server to allow for that kind of a thing?
So we are actually contemplating multiple options. We are also thinking of maybe a longer-term approaches to have some kind of a cloud-based activation where you don't have to worry about having server or being tied back to a server. We are actually exploring multiple things. We don't have a good solution yet because we are trying to figure out what our longer-term roadmap there should be.
Gotcha.
Yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, so we were grandfathered into the old way.
Yeah, right. The one thing that I will mention is that today Tableau does support having your desktops be converted to creators. So you can keep your core model, but then you can have creators on top of your core licenses.
Oh, so we can just...
You can convert your desktop licenses to creators and then still keep cores for your explorers.
Oh,
So that's something you might want to explore with Tableau.
okay, and you guys will just do that. I guess it just removes the multiple installs, because I think you're allowed 2 installs per person type of thing.
With these identity-based activations, we still let you have 2 activations per user because it's actually we allow you to have 3 activations per user because you possibly have 1 production and 2 non-production environments. And so we just want to make sure that you have that flexibility in case you need it. But we will limit you to 3 activations.
Okay. I guess once this goes live, I might look into that then.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Well, sign up for the beta, man. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So let's just then talk about tracking. So now that you have deployed, you've activated, you have multiple activation options that you can have, how do we track today? So what you really don't want is a black hole of where your users and licenses and all that is going, right? You want essentially to be able to track your current usage. You want to be able to manage your licenses, and then you want to be able to plan for further usage. And so one of the things we did in 10.0 was introduce this reporting feature we call desktop reporting. And the idea was that you would have a centralized view of your desktops on Tableau Server. And the way that it worked was the feature was off by default, but you could turn it on desktop. You could point it to the reporting server or Tableau server you want to point it to. And you could also then enable SSL on server just to make sure that your information was secure. And that would be the place where you could actually see your views. And we only supported admin views, server admin views. The idea also was that all this information would be in your organization. Nothing would be reported back to Tableau. But if you wanted to create custom admin views, that you could do that by connecting to Postgres, right? So that was something that we did. Again, it had some limitations, and so that's kind of what we're trying to solve with identity-based activations. So before that, if you've never seen desktop reporting, this is kind of how it looks like. So it gives you one admin view on license usage, your most current license usage. The one on the very top just says how many licenses you have. The one in the middle actually is telling you who are your current users, who's using it more frequently, and and the one at the bottom is saying who is not using these licenses frequently. And then we also had another view which told you what kind of maintenance, when is your maintenance coming up due, when are your term-based licenses or subscription licenses or trials expiring and things like that. So we wanted to just get a view of license usage on your Tableau server. With identity, we are making that a little bit better. And so what we're trying to do is give you site and server admin views, and this is actually where I actually want your feedback, because we are trying to do something that helps you as server administrators and users on server to have views. But I don't know how, by show of hands, how many of you are license administrators who use the portal today? Okay. And do you have access to Tableau server at all? No. Yes? Okay. One has, but not two. Okay. Yeah. You have access? Yeah. Okay. So some of you have access, but some of you don't. Okay. So we are starting to think about having server and site admin views as a way to be able to see identity-based activations. But the other thing we're exploring is to have self-service reports on your customer portal, where you might not see a lot of details, but you can at least see how many active users are using the product, and at a high level get a view of across your deployment. But coming back to this, the kinds of information that we'll show is who is using it, what version, application versions they're using it, who is not using it, all that kind of information. So just to kind of see the differences between desktop reporting and identity-based activations, the big ones are that we are starting off with site and server admin views in identity-based activations, including for our online customers. Today, we don't support those online customers. We will have it for, I just mentioned it, we'll have it for both our server and online products. We also are adding desktop and prep. So today, desktop reporting only supports desktop. And then the main thing here is that previously with desktop reporting, you have to package it, you have to enable it the feature. With IBA, or identity-based activations, that is by default. As long as you have a creator role, you get to see the reporting by default. And the last one is that with desktop reporting, we support all license types. In V1 for IBA, we'll probably only support subscription creators licenses, but we are definitely we acknowledge that that's a limitation, and we're actively looking to see how we can solve it. So here's the summary of what we've covered. So you'll see that you can have multiple different installation options. You can deploy it in multiple environments. You can also have multiple activation options. And we actually let you choose and pick, and you can do it any different combinations. We support all these different kinds of things. We are hoping that we're going to give you flexibility based on this. With that, I think I'm going to, and here are some resources that we used all through the presentation. And we actually want to hear your takeaways. We want to hear some of your pain points today. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, well, how are we doing on time?
We're doing pretty good. We have 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, one of the things we were hoping that you would all get out of this today is have like at least one new thing you learned, something solid you can kind of take back and implement once you get back home. So if you wouldn't mind, you'd like kind of gather in little groups of 2 or 3 and just like kind of do a quick discussion amongst yourselves of kind of what new tricks you've learned today or things you're thinking about, and then we'll kind of do a little sharing at the end and recap. So go ahead and kind of cluster up with whoever your neighbors are nearest you and make a new friend.
Actually, I'd like to make a request. One is a takeaway, but also if you can also share any challenge that you have today that you'd like to address. So we'll do 2. We'll do any takeaways as well as any problems you want us to address. Yeah, of course.
So my name is Jeff Cumberland. I support the desktop tablet at Cigna. And we recently upgraded to 2018.2, and it was was quite a challenge to get everything packaged.
All right. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for discussion. Now we take a couple of quick minutes just to discuss what you've all learned today, and also, yeah, to see what some of the challenges are. If there are some problems you're facing that we didn't cover today, we would love to hear about those now.
Any volunteers on what the takeaway was from the presentation? Yeah.
So the identity-based activation sounds very, very appealing.
All right.
I guess this is more of a question
Yeah,
than an observation.
sure.
So the way I manage my license pool is we have small subunits, and I'll assign a licensing portal that 10 licenses to an owner, and they will go in and manage their individual users. I'm curious how that would tie into a server, because those people are typically site administrators
Yep.
for the same
Yeah,
application.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
assuming there's some connectivity and thought processes around how.
Sure. Yeah. So the good news is this: when you assign a pool of licenses today to those users on the customer portal, what you'll need to do with IBA or identity-based activations is that you just assign a server key to a particular user, because what these desktops and prep is really doing behind the scenes is they're using that server key creator activation to activate desktop and prep. So you can still do the same process, except you don't have to now assign desktop and prep keys in the pool, just the server key. As long as the person has a server key and is able to manage that, they just manage those desktops and preps as well.
Nice. Because my other question was going to be around the activation key, where it's like I have 350 licenses, and to be able to script it and automate the deployment, is there a lookup key? I mean, how would I pull from a list where there's one key per person? So
Yeah, no, you just activate the server, and you don't have to manage keys at all for desktop and prep. Yeah. There was some hand there, yes.
Can we disable the update option? So whenever there is a new update, whenever I open the desktop, it says new update available. Skip it or install.
Yeah, that's available.
Disable it for everyone.
It is, with Windows, that's one of the installer properties. It's called auto update. Just set auto update equals 0. That will disable it. There won't even be a menu for it that shows up, so the user won't even see that. If you happen to be using Mac, it's configurable within a plist that you'll have to do after the fact. But yeah, whether you're using Mac or Windows, you can disable that.
And one other question. So, let's say I assign a license to a user and they leave the company and reassign to a different user and they got fired or something. How many times can we reuse the same product?
So technically, you can only have 2 activations for the same license key. It's just a secret for you guys. We actually give you a couple more because we know that the deactivation is a problem today. But what I would suggest is that don't depend on that. If you're already packaging your desktop, there's no reason you can't use the reclaim license flag to be able to set that and just make that easier for yourself. Or as the gentleman here was talking about, use ATR, and then we do that for you, and you're not thinking actively about activating, right? So that's what I would suggest. Yeah. Her, and then for sure you, yes.
So if we're wanting to strip licenses from inactive users,
Mhm.
is that done through the deployment, or what's the best business practice of doing that? Or is that even an option?
So with ATR, so when you say strip, are you saying you want to unassign and then assign it to somebody else?
Just deactivate it altogether and put it back into our available licenses.
So again, if you're packaging your desktops today, then I would say that use reclaim license because, use reclaim license and then it'll just reclaim it for you. And then because they can't activate it, they'll probably come back to you and say, hey, I'm still using.
Yeah.
Right? So
That's like
yeah,
after X amount of days, right?
Yep.
Okay.
yep, yep. Sorry, go ahead.
I didn't talk to you about this before, but we found that in our uninstall script, it was not deactivating. It was this was before the reclaim license part on the uninstallation. What we did to try to remedy that was we had to have it check when it's running the package to uninstall it. We check to make sure that Tableau, if it's running, and we close it if it's running. And what we saw is that if Tableau was running at the time of installation,
It won't deactivate, yeah.
deactivate uninstall software and then delete any files that were left. If Tableau was open when you ran that, it would just remove Tableau and it wouldn't get deactivated.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to repeat one of your questions from before just so that everybody else can benefit from it as well. So Cigna has implemented ATR, and so one of the challenges there is that because you have to activate, if the ATRs expire, you have to activate the license again. So one of the things that Cigna has implemented is a kind of a shortcut in the UI where they can just go and click on that and activate again, right? So one of the questions was, is there a better way of automating this instead of having a shortcut? And the only other thing that I can think of that customers have told me has been helpful to them is you can have like a tableau.exe-activate, and maybe that's the shortcut key that you're using also. But essentially what they do is that they go and check to make sure that there's no valid licenses, and you can do that by scripting it. There's a command that I can show you later on, where you can see that, make sure that it's not activated and then activate it in the background for them. But if your users are fairly well-trained and they're able to use the shortcut method, I would say just keep it. Yeah.
We'll probably switch the identity base.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Cool. Right.
I guess you mentioned you were able to convert over to the creator licenses. Would that be switching over from the maintenance payment model over to the 70 a month model then for payment?
That is correct. Talk to your salesperson because there are some incentives that are being offered to customers who are on the grandfathered in, who are in the traditional thing. So I'm not the expert on that because I don't work on the business side of things, but I know those conversations are happening.
Because that would significantly increase our costs
Yep.
by moving to that.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. So talk to your salesperson because there are things that Tableau can do. Yep. Yep. Go ahead.
I heard earlier
that web authoring was becoming more and more enhanced. Is it possible that web authoring will eventually totally do away with? Is that in the
Absolutely.
long
So
reach?
definitely, so I don't know if that is going to be the case anytime soon, because there's a lot of flexibility with desktop today, where you can be installed and go offline, be on a plane, and still continue to use it to develop, to build your dashboards and things like that you can't do if you're just a web author and on the server. But it is true that Tableau is adding more and more things into the server product, and at some point of time, desktop and web authoring are going to be on with full parity. And so users can choose whether they want to use desktop or maybe they just want to use web authoring. And I know a lot of companies who are moving towards web authoring because that's where they see the future. And they also have problems packaging and deploying and maintaining desktops. So that's another reason. So from a Tableau's perspective, we want you to do what's right for you. So if web authoring appeals to you, go for it, we'll support you. If you want to stay with desktop, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, I think some people are still going to want to continue to have a desktop product, like for those unconnected scenarios where you don't have access to the cloud. So I don't see it going away even when we do get feature parity between the web authoring story and what you're able to do on desktop today.
Was there questions from here? No? Okay. Any other questions? Any other challenges that you have today? Any takeaways from this presentation other than IVA? All right. Cool. We thank you for your time. We have a survey. Oh, sorry. Finish.
Well, we'll mention that there are a few other related sessions, so if you are interested in the topic of deployment, there is tomorrow a talk on deploying Tableau. Would appreciate if you complete the session survey form when you leave here. It's a great tool for us just because there are topics we didn't cover you really wish we would have gotten into or gone into deeper, or there were some things you thought, I could have done without that. Let us know, so this way we can tailor future courses to be what fits and serves you best. And with that, we will say thank you. Yeah, we appreciate it.